Advent meditation today is on Anna, who was a prophetess in the temple. And Jesus was taken as a baby to the temple, as was a requirement of the law, on the 8th day. Every firstborn male was taken to be consecrated there, so that was nothing unusual. That happened to every firstborn. But what was unusual is that when he entered the temple with his parents, two people were moved by God's Spirit to speak about who this baby was. And the first was Simeon, who we heard about yesterday, and the second was Anna. And it doesn't say very much about Anna. It just tells us that she was a prophetess, and presumably that's because she had spoken God's words before to people, things that God had given her and put on her heart to say to his people. And the other thing we know is that she lived in the temple. She'd lived there since she was had become a widow. So she was very old. I mean, it says either she was 84 or she had lived in the temple for 84 years since her husband had died, which would make her over 100. And it reminds me of some verses from Psalm 84, which says, "Blessed are those who dwell in your house. They are ever praising you." And that was like Anna. She dwelt in the temple of God. She dwelt in God's house, and she was ever praising him. As it says in Psalm 84, better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. So she'd spent all these days in God's courts, praising him, worshipping him, and listening for his voice. So she was somebody who was really tuned in to who God was and the kind of things that God would say. As Mary and Joseph walk into the temple carrying this baby, Anna instantly recognizes that this is Jesus, this is the Christ. And she shouts out to everybody that this is a baby who has come to bring redemption. She says to all who were listening and all who were looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem. So the child causes her to speak out, like with Simeon. There's something in just his presence, in the fact that his parents are bringing him into the temple, that causes her to tell everybody who's around listening of who he is and what he will bring, the comfort, the redemption that he will bring. Like us, it reminds me of that once we've recognized who Christ is and the life that he brings, that causes us to speak out. We cannot be silent if our lives have been changed. And I imagine that would have brought great confirmation to Joseph and to Mary, to have their baby recognized. You know, it wasn't just that angels had appeared to them. They'd now had the shepherds come to tell them who this baby was, and a very old man and an even older woman recognizing who this baby was and what he would bring. I think it's wonderful in Luke that these characters are included, even if only a tiny bit is said about them. And we know her whole life was spent in the courts of the Lord, and all we hear is this recognition of Jesus Christ as he comes in as a baby. And yet that was the fulfillment. It was personal fulfillment for her. She knew that she'd been waiting for this day, like Simeon knew that she was waiting for what God has promised. And I think sometimes in our lives, we're waiting for this thing that God has promised deep inside us. We're waiting to see it happen, it come to fulfillment. And it's reminded me maybe of those older Christians. So I'd just like us today to think about those older Christians in our lives who have spoken in truth for us, who have spoken God's truth, who've helped us to recognize Christ, who've helped us to recognize who this baby is, who the Christ child is, as he comes in, who cannot keep silent because of what God has shown them, and that his promise to them has been fulfilled in this Christ child being shown in the temple. So I've found just hearing and reading about Anna today really encouraging for me, both to think about those older people who've spoken into my life. And maybe if you are an older person and there's somebody who you pray for and who you hold in your heart and who you're waiting for them to recognize Christ, keep going with that, because that is an amazing promise that God has given you. Thank you.